The doors of the courtroom opened with the sound of judgment itself, heavy hinges crying out as Captain Elias Ward was led inside, wrists bound in cold steel. The murmur of reporters faded into a suffocating silence. His uniform, once decorated with honor, had been replaced by a plain gray suit, too large for his frame. Every step echoed the contradiction of his life. A man built to serve, now branded as a threat. Ava Moreno, seated near the defense table, lifted her eyes from the file to the man she'd only read about. His posture was soldier straight, despite the cuffs, his gaze forward, unbroken. Somewhere between fear and disbelief, she felt the weight of what justice was about to demand. Behind them, officers stood like statues, some avoiding his eyes, others staring too long as if searching for the man they once saluted. The courtroom had emptied, but Ava Moreno stayed behind, her hands buried in the case file as if trying to dig through paper into truth itself. The evidence was too perfect. Timestamps lined up too neatly. Statements sounded rehearsed. Elias sat quietly beside her, his silence as steady as the hum of the ceiling lights. When she finally asked him if he had anything to hide, he looked at her with the kind of weariness that comes from having nothing left to defend. "They know what happened," he said, voice low and even. "They just don't want to say it." Something about that broke the rhythm of her thoughts. For the first time, Ava felt that this wasn't just another case. It was a story written long before she arrived, and she was stepping into someone else's lie. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed again with low murmurs as Sergeant Marcus Hale took the stand. His crisp uniform gleamed under the overhead lights, every button a reflection of authority. He spoke with confidence, too much of it, Ava thought, describing Elias's alleged outburst, the fight that ended in blood and disgrace. Each sentence sounded rehearsed, delivered like a performance perfected in front of a mirror. Elias didn't look up once. His gaze stayed fixed on the table, jaw tight. When Ava cross-examined, her voice trembled at first, but her questions cut deeper with every answer Hale gave. And when she caught the brief flicker of his eyes, the momentary shift of guilt, she knew something in his story had cracked. After the hearing, Ava stepped into the courthouse hallway, her heart pounding with the rhythm of questions she wasn't ready to ask. The corridor stretched ahead, lined with portraits of judges, stern faces staring down from gilded frames, as though silently reminding her of the cost of defiance. She paused by a water fountain, the hum of distant footsteps echoing like ghosts. Behind her, Elias's voice reached her quietly. "He was lying," he said. She turned to see him flanked by two officers waiting to escort him back to holding. "I know," she replied. Their eyes met, hers filled with uncertainty, his with something closer to forgiveness. And for that fleeting second, the sterile hallway felt almost human. That night, long after the courthouse lights dimmed, Ava sat in her cramped office, surrounded by folders and half-drunk coffee. She read the same line from the arrest report over and over. Subject initiated force without provocation. Something about it gnawed at her. The language too sterile. The details too clean. Then her office phone rang, a voice distorted by fear on the other end. "If you're defending him," the caller said, "you need to check the evidence room, folder 7B. Before they make it disappear." The line went dead. The silence afterward was louder than any sound she'd ever heard. Outside, thunder rolled through the city, as if the storm had finally decided to begin. The holding area smelled of metal and cold coffee, the kind of place where hope went to forget itself. Ava walked through the corridor, her heels echoing off the concrete as she rehearsed what to say. She found Elias sitting behind reinforced glass, his posture still straight, his expression unreadable. When she told him she believed something in the report was wrong, he smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried more sorrow than joy. "I've been writing my story for years," he said. "You just happened to start reading it." Her fingers trembled as she held the phone between them, the plexiglass separating belief from betrayal. Somewhere in that silence, trust began. Thin as glass, fragile as truth. In the records room, the hum of old servers filled the air like a heartbeat of secrets. Ava's ID card trembled as she swiped access to the evidence system. The time-stamped footage from the night of the alleged assault should have been there. It wasn't. Every entry around it was intact, but folder 7B was empty. Her pulse quickened. On the desk beside her, a flash drive with no label sat half-hidden under a stack of forms, as if left there by accident or design. She plugged it in, hesitating only once before pressing play. The grainy video flickered to life, showing a confrontation between two men, Elias and someone else. But before she could see the face, the screen went black. Her reflection stared back at her from the monitor, framed by the ghosts of missing seconds. She found him in the parking structure. Noah Trent, the city surveillance technician. He looked younger than she expected, a man with guilt stitched into his every movement. He handed her an envelope and whispered that he'd seen the missing footage, that it proved Elias hadn't started the fight. His voice shook with fear. "They told me to delete it," he said, eyes darting toward the stairwell, "but I made a copy." A moment later, headlights swept across the concrete pillars, and he was gone, swallowed by the dark. Ava opened the envelope under the flickering light. A single USB drive, marked only with the date of the assault. The world suddenly felt smaller and more dangerous. The next morning, Chief Raymond Locke appeared in Ava's office unannounced, bringing with him the kind of calm that only power can afford. He was polite, composed, and terrifyingly assured. He told her the city had no patience for crusades, that she should focus on what can be proven. His voice never rose, but each word carried the weight of authority, disguised as courtesy. When he left, the air felt colder. Ava stood alone, realizing she had just been warned, not threatened, but reminded of her place. Outside the window, the city seemed to stare back, a reflection of the same machinery that had built men like Locke. Men who could destroy a truth simply by denying it. That evening, Ava visited Elias again, the envelope with Noah's drive tucked safely inside her coat. He listened quietly as she told him what she'd found, his eyes searching hers for the edge between hope and danger. "If I prove this," she said, "they'll come after both of us." Elias nodded slowly. "They already have," he answered. There was no fear in his voice, only a calm acceptance, the tone of a soldier who'd fought longer than anyone had noticed. For the first time, Ava realized he wasn't just defending himself. He was protecting something larger. The idea that truth still meant something in a world built on its ruins. The room was dark, except for the glow of the monitor as Ava inserted the drive Noah had given her. The video began with the harsh click of fluorescent lights and the image of a narrow corridor inside the precinct. Two figures appeared, one unmistakably Elias, the other blurred by motion. For several seconds, the confrontation unfolded in silence. Elias raised his hands, palms open, but the recording glitched, frames skipping like a heartbeat under pressure. Then came a gunshot, not from him, but from the unseen figure. The screen froze on Elias's face. Shocked, resolute, human. Ava leaned back in her chair, her pulse pounding. The truth was there, buried in fragments. But to show it, she'd have to go against everything the law told her to trust. Noah called her from a payphone, his voice trembling, insisting they meet again. When she arrived at the same underground lot, he was pacing near the exit ramp, his hands stuffed into the pockets of a worn jacket. "They know I copied it," he said. His eyes darted to the shadows. "They're watching me now." Ava wanted to tell him it would be fine, but she could see it wouldn't be. She handed him a small card with her home address and told him to go there if anything happened. For a moment he just looked at her, two people on opposite sides of fear, bound by the same truth. Then a car door slammed somewhere in the darkness, and he was gone before she could speak again. That night, rain lashed the city like a confession. Ava's phone buzzed at midnight. An unknown number, one word: run. She bolted from her apartment just as headlights swept through the blinds. Outside, the wet streets glowed under red and blue reflections, sirens distant but drawing closer. Her heart hammered as she turned corners through the empty blocks, clutching her briefcase like a lifeline. Behind her, a car followed too slowly to be random. Somewhere in the blur of panic, she realized it wasn't Elias they were hunting anymore, it was her. Truth, she thought, was just another kind of target. By dawn, Ava reached the courthouse archives, soaked, shivering, but alive. Inside, she found Noah waiting, eyes red from sleeplessness. He'd brought a backup copy of the footage, clutching it like scripture. "They killed the original," he said quietly. "I think they'll come for me next." She wanted to promise him safety, but the lie caught in her throat. Elias's file lay open on the desk. Each page now, a map of deceit. Noah's voice trembled as he confessed that the command came from higher up. Not just Hale, but Chief Locke himself. "They said it would protect the department," he whispered. Ava's hands shook as she reached for the drive. "Then, let's protect the truth instead." By evening, Noah was gone. His apartment door left ajar, his things untouched, the TV still humming static. Ava stood in the doorway, numb. The police called it a disappearance. She knew it was a silencing. In her coat pocket, the backup drive pulsed against her hand like a heartbeat. Every truth demanded a price. She could feel this one collecting. As she turned away from the empty room, the reflection in the hallway mirror caught her face. The fear, the fatigue, and beneath it all, the flicker of purpose. She wasn't running anymore. She was preparing for war. Ava couldn't sleep. Her phone buzzed just past midnight, an unlisted number again. This time, the voice on the line didn't whisper. "You don't know what you're touching," it said, low and steady, like someone rehearsing calm. Locke's not the only one protecting it. The line went dead, but the silence that followed was worse than any threat. Ava sat in the dark, staring at the wall where her case notes hung, red string crisscrossing names and dates like veins. Somewhere in the tangle, truth and survival had started to blur. Outside her window, the city lights flickered in rhythm with her heartbeat, as if the whole skyline was warning her to stop. When she arrived at the precinct the next morning, the air felt colder. Officers avoiding her eyes, conversations stopping mid-sentence. Detective Marcus Hale waited in the interview room. Posture perfect, expression unreadable. She had called him in for clarification, but both knew it was more than that. The moment the recorder clicked on, the room shifted. Her questions cut through the silence, each one chipping away at his composure. "Where were you?" she asked. When the footage disappeared, his eyes flicked up, and for the first time she saw fear behind the calm. He straightened his tie, but his hands shook, just slightly, enough to betray him. When Hale finally spoke, the words came slow, measured, as though weighed before release. He admitted that the assault report had been rewritten, that Chief Locke had ordered him to contain the fallout from the failed operation overseas. Elias had refused to lie, and that refusal had marked him. Ava listened in silence, every word landing like a nail into the coffin of her faith in justice. Hale's voice broke once. When he mentioned the soldiers who died, the truth they were ordered to erase. "I told myself it was for the department," he said. "Now I can't sleep without seeing their faces." The recorder kept blinking, steady as breath, capturing the confession that would change everything. By noon, the confession had reached Chief Locke's office. When Ava walked in, his expression carried no surprise, only disappointment, as though she had broken some sacred order. "Do you know what happens when people like you start pulling at threads?" he asked. "Institutions unravel. Lives collapse. His calm was terrifying. A mask honed over decades. He denied everything with the ease of a man who'd made truth bend before. But when Ava played a clip of Hale's confession, his hand twitched once. Small, involuntary. For a moment, she saw the man beneath the badge. Aging, brittle, and afraid of ghosts he couldn't control. That evening, Hale turned himself in. Word spread quickly. Officers whispering in corridors, silence trailing Ava wherever she walked. But what haunted her wasn't triumph. It was the realization that confession alone couldn't cleanse a system built on silence. When she visited Elias to tell him, his reaction wasn't relief, but sorrow. "They'll replace him," he said softly. "They always do." The weight of his words hung between them, truth turning heavier with every breath. Yet when he looked up, there was something in his eyes. Not hope, but the quiet certainty of a man who still believed justice, once found, could stand on its own. The courtroom felt different that morning, heavier, quieter, as though even the walls had learned the weight of truth. Ava stood before the bench, her pulse steady but fierce. Across from her, Chief Locke sat at the prosecution table, calm, unshaken, as if confident that power could still silence revelation. Elias entered moments later, unshackled this time, his steps slow, deliberate, carrying the gravity of a man who had nothing left to lose except his name. When the judge called the session to order, the air thickened with history repeating itself. Only this time the script had changed, and Ava held the pen. Ava approached the bench with quiet precision. From her briefcase, she withdrew a flash drive, the same one Noah had risked his life to preserve. "Your Honor," she said, "this footage was withheld from the original investigation." The judge gestured for it to be played. The lights dimmed as the monitor flickered to life, showing the confrontation. Elias raising his hands. Hale's gun. Flashing in panic, the truth playing out in real time. A hush fell over the room. When the screen went dark, Ava's voice carried through the silence like the first breath after drowning. "This man didn't fight the law," she said. He defended it, even when it turned against him. When Ava called Chief Locke to the stand, the entire courtroom shifted. He rose slowly, his authority undimmed, but his certainty beginning to fracture. She questioned him with the precision of a surgeon, each word deliberate, each silence intentional. "Did you order the report to be altered?" she asked. "Did you command Detective Hale to remove the footage?" Locke denied both, his tone calm but thinning. Then Ava played Hale's recorded confession, his voice echoing through the speakers like a ghost summoned to bear witness. Locke's face didn't move, but his eyes did. Just enough for everyone to see the man behind the mask tremble. Locke's defense cracked like old marble. Hale's confession, the footage, the timeline, all converged into a single truth, too solid to deny. The prosecutor tried to object, but the judge silenced him with one raised hand. As Locke stood to defend his legacy, his voice faltered, the words splintering under the weight of evidence. "You think justice is clean?" he said bitterly. "It's built on compromises." But the courtroom no longer belonged to him. Ava turned toward Elias, and for the first time since his arrest, he smiled, faintly. The expression of a man who'd watched falsehood crumble before faith. The silence that followed was absolute, sacred. The gavel struck once, sharp as thunder. "Case dismissed," the judge said. "Captain Elias Ward is cleared of all charges." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, every officer in the gallery rose, not by order, but by instinct, standing at attention as Elias turned to face them. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence carried more dignity than any declaration. Ava stood beside him, her eyes wet but unbroken. The camera of every reporter caught the same image. A man once branded guilty, now honored by the very system that betrayed him. And as he lifted his gaze toward the light streaming through the high windows, the air itself seemed to stand still. Justice, finally. unbound. The courthouse steps were chaos, cameras flashing, voices shouting, 100 versions of truth colliding at once. Ava shielded her eyes as microphones pressed in, demanding words she didn't yet have. Elias stood beside her, the hum of the crowd washing over him like wind against stone. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. He simply existed in a calm beyond understanding, the dignity of survival etched into every line of his face. "Do you have a statement, Captain?" someone yelled. Elias looked toward the reporters, his voice deep and steady. "I have nothing to prove. I just hope we remember who justice is supposed to serve." The words silenced them all. That evening, Marcus Hale requested a press conference. The department gathered in uneasy silence as he stood before the podium, still in uniform but stripped of command. Cameras clicked. Every word mattered now. "I followed orders I knew were wrong," he said, voice cracking. "And I let an innocent man bear the weight of my silence." He paused, looking into the crowd, eyes wet. "If justice means anything, it starts with admitting we broke it." When he stepped away from the microphone, no one clapped. The silence that followed was heavier than judgment, the sound of an institution beginning to listen. Chief Raymond Locke's office stood silent. The blinds were half closed, dust catching the last light of the afternoon. He sat alone, the once commanding posture reduced to stillness. His badge lay on the desk, its shine dulled by the fading sun. For years, that emblem had been his armor, the symbol of control. Now, it was nothing more than a reflection of what power costs when it outlives integrity. When the knock came, 2 short raps from internal affairs, he didn't flinch. He just whispered, "It's about time," and stared at the horizon as they entered to take him away. A week later, Ava sat across from a journalist for an exclusive interview. The cameras were gentle this time, no flashing, no frenzy, just quiet curiosity. "You risk everything," the reporter said. "Why?" Ava smiled faintly, folding her hands. "Because someone already lost everything before I did." She paused, eyes drifting toward the window where the city glowed with the beginnings of night. "Justice isn't a verdict," she added softly. "It's a choice we have to keep making." The room fell silent as the interviewer nodded, realizing that some stories don't end, they echo. Elias returned to the military cemetery at dawn. The air was cold, the horizon a thin line of gold breaking through mist. He stopped before 3 identical headstones, names from the operation that had started everything. His hands clasped behind his back, the old posture of command softening into reverence. Ava stood a few paces behind, silent. "They died doing what was right," Elias said quietly, "and we forgot that for a while." The wind carried his words between the graves, the sound of redemption spoken not to the living, but to those who'd never hear it. Then, without turning, he said, "Thank you," and walked away, each step a release. The boardroom was solemn. A long mahogany table stretched between flags and portraits, the air thick with ceremony and regret. Elias Ward stood at its center, no longer accused, now summoned for reinstatement. A panel of officers read from the decision, voices low, deliberate. "All charges expunged. Honors reinstated." He nodded once, his composure unbroken, but behind his stillness, a lifetime shifted. Ava sat in the corner, observing quietly, pride tempered by humility. Justice had come not as applause, but as acknowledgement. The kind that doesn't need to be heard to be felt. Later, Ava returned to the courtroom, empty now, except for the echo of what had happened there. She stood where Elias once sat in handcuffs, running her hand along the polished wood of the defense table. The silence felt different this time. No longer oppressive, but sacred. The light streaming through the tall windows cut across the floor like divine geometry. She smiled faintly, realizing justice wasn't a building, a law, or a verdict. It was a choice. made again and again by those who refused to look away. Then she turned and walked out, leaving the silence whole. The ceremony took place in the courtyard of the precinct, under a sky brushed with gold. Officers lined up in rows, their uniforms immaculate, their eyes lifted toward the stage. When Elias stepped forward to receive the Medal of Honor had once been denied, the applause began softly, then swelled. Not loud, but sincere. The sound of men and women rediscovering respect. Ava stood at the edge of the crowd, watching him accept it not as a prize, but as closure. When their eyes met, he nodded, not in thanks, but in solidarity. The storm had ended. The air was clean again. When the ceremony ended, Elias turned toward the assembled officers. For a moment, no one moved. Then one officer, then another, and another rose into a unified salute. The sound of motion filled the courtyard like a wave breaking over silence. Every badge gleamed under the dying light, and every hand raised was a wordless apology. Elias stood still, his eyes glistening, then lifted his hand in return. Slow, deliberate, final. Around him, even the air seemed to still in respect. He had entered the system in chains. Now it stood before him in reverence. The next morning, the city was quiet. Elias walked alone through the streets, dressed not in uniform, but in a simple coat. The world seemed lighter now, not because it had changed, but because he had. Passing the courthouse, he stopped for a moment, looking up at its marble facade. For years, it had been the symbol of his undoing. Now it was only a building again. Across the street, Ava watched from her car, smiling faintly before driving away. As Elias turned and continued down the empty street, the sun rose over the skyline, washing him in light. A man finally free, carrying nothing but truth.